up, everybody? This is Karak with ACG, Devil May Cry. It's been a Capcom staple action-adventure hack-and-slash third-person shooter since its original release in 2001, and while not the most evened out of release schedules ever, with 11 years passing since its last numbered game in the series, somehow its skill-based mechanics of quick battle moments interspersed with what the hell just happened story sections has captured fans' attention and held it for 18 years. Devil May Cry 5 releases on March 8th for PC, Xbox, and PS4. It's time to see if giant swords and rock and roll is still as cool as the developers think it is, and to do that, here comes a review that isn't 2 minutes long or filled with sponsored bullcrap. Let's see how the game does, shall we? As always, if you like the video, maybe subscribe. So here's my review for Devil May Cry 5. Danzig is apparently skipping Arm Day, Devil May Deadpool, and dealing death to demons dual-barreled style. Also, with the embargo here on almost everything, this review should be pretty much spoiler-free. As you can see in the footage, I beat it and have unlocked the extras, but I won't be showing a ton of later game footage or creatures. That out of the way, graphics is up first. Now, Devil May Cry has always really tried to push the graphics envelope for better or worse, regardless of when it came out. But I have to say the adjustments made here, many times reflecting the DNA of passed down knowledge from the Resident Evil remake we just saw, as well as some other more technical elements, has absolutely improved the overall package. The jump to the RE engine away from the MT framework has continued to work wonders here with a more realistic but still over-the-top graphical style and an almost hyper-realistic look to the rendering, while still retaining a foothold solidly in the over-the-top color palette of otherworldly creatures, all trying to pop your head off like a friggin' champagne cork. First, the level of detail. We have to discuss that. In some of the animations, it is just incredible, like the first time Nero fires off his guns lickety-split into an enemy's four-jawed mouth, and you realize the breech at the back of the gun leaks out fire, even as it spits out projectiles. It's excellent and gives you this power is everything kind of feel to the weapons, even if that's not exactly realistic. Or the moment you enter an enemy's slowdown spell and see one of the characters actually fully impact the ground before rolling back up to their feet. Is it perfect? No, absolutely not, but its level of detail is leagues above the prior titles and directly in line with many of the games currently on the market, and better than some. And the best thing about Devil May Cry is you're dancing around dealing death to demons. There's always some kind of particle effect showering the characters with sand, blood, and other body fluids that are probably best left unidentified. There's screen-sized special effects when impacts hit the ground and the entire screen warbles a bit like a stunt camera. There are a large number of weapons and unique attacks for the 3 main characters you play, with one character being a dramatic departure from the other 2. That being said, all of them have a very unique feel to them, and secret items can be found along the way for some of them. As you progress, you unlock skills, which unlock cooler and cooler looking attacks as well. However, the one thing I think almost everybody's going to realize right away is the leaps that this game has made when it comes to the facial tech. The handling of things like Nero's 5-day boy band stubble sticking out in individual hairs on his face during a cutscene. The characters are easily the spotlight in the game, from the wayward drop of someone's coattails as they smash into the ground on top of an enemy's head, showing off cloth physics, to the improved hair and texturing that this generation can bring, but many games have actually not delivered. When it comes to the enemy and the world design, though, I'm of 2 minds here. First, the enemies are a who's who of a monster's FBI most wanted list, with creatures with mouths in their stomachs, fists coming out of their spines, enemies with heads everywhere, enemies that don't look like they have heads, and demons that look like flies, imagining what demons would look like and then constructing them out of bloody Lincoln logs, and all manner of creatures in between that. I like the enemy's design, and their mixing in particular groups means that each one has a particular skill facet needed to defeat them that I'll talk about in the gameplay section. Where Devil May Cry excels is informing the gamer visually of what they need to do to defeat some of these creatures, even if doing so is actually harder than it appears. For example, the cracks that start to appear in an enemy's shield, slowly indicating that you're whittling away at his weak spot. Or nightmarish giant scissor-carrying flying chicks with masks on that react to you breaking one of the sides of their scissors with your continued hits by going absolutely batshit insane for a second and turn the combat to 11. And all those elements work to solidify this feeling of place, space, and impact that has a meaning, and it's nice to see even the smaller enemies showing some signs of being hurt or impacted. However, there's some ugly-ass textures that get in the way of the presentation, and not like being in the side somewhere where you can't see them, which is a typical budget memory saving technique, but actually just straight up, right in your face, even as you start a level. It doesn't happen all the time, but it does happen enough that it's noticeable. And let's talk about the levels themselves. While having a number of secrets and somewhat unique cutbacks, they can feel a bit samey as you work your way through the game's 20-plus missions. It doesn't have that stretchy uniqueness of, say, a Dark Souls game with vast, unique locations, but instead really inhabits 1 or 2 major areas with unique locations separated within them. It's a design conceit to tell the story, and I do get that, but I would have liked a bit more of an attempt to stand apart and stretch that out a bit. After the 300th bloody backbone-looking bridge crossing, I started to zone out a bit whenever I came to those. Now, a game like this is going to need good performance, and that brings us to this section. First, let's discuss for a second the meaning between locked and at, because you're going to hear every developer try to say their game runs at 4K 60 FPS or at 1080p 60 FPS. That's not the same as locked, and make no mistake, nothing in Devil May Cry 5 is locked when it comes to performance. Let's begin. PC code sadly wasn't available for me for DMC, but consoles were. The Xbox X runs at a native 4K confirmed, while the base consoles run at 1080p. PS4 Pro actually looks a bit off, and no matter what I did, it never really looked like true 4K. I think that's probably checkerboarded, but I didn't get a chance to count. This is backed up, though, by Capcom producer Mike Walker's comment that it was aimed at 4K 60 FPS, but that it would use visual techniques to get there. It was very hard to notice, and only the most detailed gamer is going to probably spot that. The thing I have to say, though, that is a bit disappointing to notice is that the premier consoles don't take huge advantage of the improved hardware other than the 4K native resolution, with most effects being identical between them, other than maybe higher fidelity versions here and there for a few of the effects. But that might also explain some of the problems that we've run into. For instance, when not in the cutscenes, the premium consoles usually hold at around 60 FPS, where the base consoles drop to the mid-40s occasionally, and the Xbox original really holding up the back end here, rarely ever sticking to 60 FPS for long periods of time. In particular, battles especially later on in the endgame seem to be troublesome. Cutscenes also have their issues with dropped FPS everywhere on all the consoles, none of them locked at 60 FPS, and instead wavering at times between 60 and 50 on the premiums and a tiny bit lower on the base systems. It's an odd situation at the best of times. Luckily, it's just during those cutscenes, but it's noticeable, so I figured I'd point it out. Overall, I have to say this. I like that the game's targeted 4K or 1080p on the premium base consoles. That's a laudable goal, but it shows the same weakness that past games here have been doing. In some moments, it just can't hold it, and the variability in the input changing as the FPS moves around is going to be noticeable to some gamers. Luckily, other than the Xbox original, which seems to have problems overall all the time, retaining anything near 60 FPS in normal gameplay, the others really don't have as many issues. It's an extraordinary looking game, but with a couple problems here or there. Sound, music, and voice.
Thank you for that.
They have to do that in here. It already smells like ass.
That's you.
Hey, Nico!
Don't lose your tits. I see them.
And we're going to do sound first in this group. This is actually good. One thing that's almost instantly noticeable is the heavy use of sidechaining and the vocals and the specific creature effects, or, well, everything else. For example, if your character has a one-liner to say in battle, it's lifted just a bit above the chaos, and it makes it a bit clearer to make out, as some of the enemies you end up fighting have their own. For example, one character, which is mounted, you fight, and when that mount thunders around or makes sounds, the rest of the battle's just slightly compressed out of the way. Now, this really helps, especially as a good number of the battles have elemental facets to them, whether that be fire, ice, electricity, or earth-based, and many of those can last for a couple seconds. If you end up in a battle with 3 or 4 overlapping effects, it can get a little bit messy. Here, though, most everything is settled down in its own spot with a nice bit of attention paid to keeping all the sound effects at a level where almost every element can be heard. Weapon attacks and spells sound good. Locational effects like the crumbling of a tower while you're still in it have a nice full-throated feel to them, and most importantly, the game does a good job of playing out sounds to inform you of where the enemies are. While some make almost no sound when attacking you, if an enemy does and they're off-screen, you can discern where they're coming from quite easily, like the more animal-based creatures that have a skittering, kicking up dirt kind of sound to them. While the game doesn't have the most options when it comes to audio, it does have the ability to adjust dynamic range, which helps for those with lower or higher fidelity sound systems. Overall, really good. Music. This is excellent, from the over-the-top orchestral moments when giant bosses are smashing through the landscape in a desperate bid to see if they can pull you apart like demon-flavored string cheese, to the alt-rock, almost punk-themed elements of various characters' battle music. The enormous number of little secrets and funny moments, which I won't spoil here, are incredible. You can't argue that it's a bit eclectic, jumping from genre to genre fast enough that if you're new to the games, you might think, did they just download random music? But every theme has its own moment and place. Also, when you beat the game, you can switch out various battle musics for different characters and mix and match. Music like this has to make sense, otherwise it's going to feel like a travesty of choice, but DMC5 seems to get it overall right, and whether it's going for balls to the walls or insane double bass drum intros, it actually ends up working, even though, at times, it can be a little bit surprising. Voice. Let's get this out of the way. Some of the characters have been replaced with others for this game's voice acting. Now, not knowing the behind the scenes and accepting that a huge number of people may find DMC5 as their first Devil May Cry game ever, I can see the disappointment, but I have to say, I'm actually pretty okay with the changes. Everyone from Emily Bader to Ruben Langdon does a good job here, offering at the very least a defined differentiation between the characters, especially the 3 demon hunters you end up becoming as you battle throughout the title's 15 plus hours of content. I would say that they all do fine with what they have to work with. The devil may care attitude of all the characters in the game come across a bit goofy, but that's the whole experience, and overall those folks add to it. But I have one huge complaint. The main bad guy you spend most of the game going after has to be one of the worst effects on a character's voice ever. It's like Shun from friggin' Virtual Fighters driving around like a demon car. It's odd. The first time he threatens your life, it's hard not to say, "Grandpa, is that you?" It's like he's talking into a tin can and someone just said, that's good enough. As the story progresses, some of this sort of makes sense, but overall I find him memorable for all the wrong reasons, and I would have loved a more menacing sounding bad guy. I want a bad guy to growl with the power of 1,000 storms where your nuts basically just say, yep, that's me leaving, and crawl back up into your belly. Not so much here. As a package, still pretty good, but it's got a couple bumps in the road. And speaking of roads, let's do some traveling, and that brings us to gameplay and a bit about the story. In Devil May Cry 5, you take on the roles of 3 demon hunters, Dante, Nero, and a new demon hunter, the mysteriously named V. V hires Dante to uncover the reason why there's mysterious attacks around the world by supernatural beings, and one thing leads to another, and, well, you get it. Devil May Cry games have never had a 1-2-3 story. Hell, they haven't even had a 1-2 story. In fact, usually the only way to keep track of some of the minutiae is if you had 3 hands and 7 fingers on each one. It's not Kingdom Hearts at all, not even close, but it is still a bit out there. Devil May Cry 5 is the same way. It's like a drunk uncle telling a cool story, starting in the middle, going to the end, then returning back to the starting, and yet you still sort of get it at the end. Especially with a game like this with a long-established past series of titles before it, this is always going to be difficult, but they certainly did attempt to do something even more unique here, and I would say for some, it's going to be a little confusing, so make sure you watch that video that you can choose at the main menu that allows you to see the past history of the Devil May Cry games. To find out what's going on around the world, going through both ruined overworld as well as a bloody mired in the gore of a million restless souls underworld, you try to figure out what happened, which really just means circulating the city in a hopped up Scooby-Doo mystery van and shiving the shit out of every spiky-headed, spirit-sucking bad guy until you get an S in your style points rating. You work through the game's levels, collecting various crystals that help you upgrade your life, devil meters, as well as cash for buying skills for the various characters, each character with their own skill tree for their own series of weapons. Also, while traveling around, you may see overlapping character moments, which is basically this thing called the cameo system, where you can see the other characters working through parts of the story at the same time. It's pretty cool, and in many ways it's connected to the ability for you to pick that character to play a level with in some, but not all of the missions. Now, when it comes to combat and control, it's important to remember that DMC isn't like a lot of other games, where combos are just a successive set of button presses. Many of the later skills involve powering something up to attack in the middle of attacking with another button, or hell, later on powering up something so that you can literally power up another something, like filling a spiritual gas can and then running home and dumping the spirits into your car. It is a complex system, and each character really handles very differently. Where Nero has the ability to grapple enemies and locations and pull them towards him, Dante's a mixture of weapon switching and quick dodging, as well as a robust stance feature, which allows you to dance between swordsman, gunslinger, royal guard, and a more generic stance, all with their own positives and negatives. The third character attacks in a way I'm not going to spoil, but to say his playstyle dramatically differs to everyone else in DMC is an understatement, with its own completely full-featured systems in place. Firstly, I have to say I like the combos and the systems. I think it's awesome, but it's also going to lead to problems for newcomers, because the game revels in its momentary intros and cutscenes. Every single new character is bookended by a mini cutscene informing you of what creature they are and basically doing the world's creepiest version of Instagram right before you begin the battle. So my best advice would be, when customizing, make sure to note what the moves are and try them between the battles. You also have the ability to try them out when customizing them in the Void, which is basically a temporary training world you can leap into, and I highly suggest it. When it comes to combos, you have everything from normal to delayed button presses, between form changes to switching weapons to keep combo streams going, and a number of other nuances. which means you may pop an enemy into the air, leap up, finish him off with a sword attack, but if you bought the air jump skill, you can then shoot them to raise them up a bit, short stroke the air jump button and switch to another weapon and combo that attack as well. But if you haven't bought that skill, then you might drop to the ground and perform a completely different set of special moves. It's branches within branches within branches. And all of this doesn't include the other fighting style as well as the devil triggers and all their alternatives. This also allows for those of you who want to get it the ability to try out for the SSS super stylish move scores by pulling off insane combo strings. Those who don't want to can still experience the game, sans all of that, you'll just get a lower grade for each battle. Because make no mistake, you can still die in a moment's notice if you do not pay attention. Speaking of dying, there are ways around this, with both the currency you collect in the game, red orbs, or with gold orbs that you collect from searching locations and in secret spots. They're sort of like mini continues. That brings us to how do you get these skills? Normally you get them by smashing the ever-living shit out of the environment and the enemies in it. But yes, you can indeed buy the main currency from the microtransaction store. And I'm going to say this. Due to the way the skills work and how so many fit into each other, and it takes a serious amount of time to master all of them, most folks buying anything with the micros are going to find out that they don't get a lot of return on that investment at all anyway. It's not like a lot of other games. It does really make you question Capcom's thinking in the first place. I mean, why put them in there? The currency isn't hard to find in DMC at all, and because you're switching out characters so often, as the story goes, it's a bit of a moot point at times. When it comes to the length of the game, though, it's about 15 hours if you explore some places, shorter if you just work through them in the lower difficulties. This feels about right here. If you win, you get another mode, as well as a number of unlocks and small changes to the story, like the game taking a picture of every new enemy you face off against and defeat. Also, the game has a number of secret weapons and smaller mission locations, and DLC is headed out at some point later this year. As a package, DMC has a absolutely robust offering. In some missions, being able to choose a character really opens it up, some secret locations, but it's held down a bit by a wayward story and possibly one of the stupidest reasons to put microtransactions I've seen in a game in a long time. And of course, that brings us to fun factor. Despite some blemishes, Devil May Cry 5 is enjoyable as hell to play. It's like a mix of Mission Impossible, Dante's Inferno, and the world's most expensive Bud Case sword store ad. It also offers a surprising number of extras when you beat it, which makes returning to it a bit less cumbersome than other games. With so many weapons, many of them having their own mini skill trees, there's a ton to upgrade, and since some weapons work better on some enemies, you have a number of gauges or specials you can activate, and of course, the devil triggers themselves. It's a very, very deep game. It's also held back a bit by some been there, done that level design, and the story that you have to stick through at least halfway before you really get to any understanding of what's occurring. What's nice here is sticking through it is so easy. The combat system is so engaging, and some of the levels are actually quite interesting, though, like I said, there's a couple that start to feel a little been there, done that. But is fun factor all that matters? Well, that brings us to the rating. As you guys know, I rate games on a buy, wait for sale, rent, or never touch it again rating system, with rent being replaced by deep sale on PC, if that's the score. And sure, yeah, the game's a buy, but you know what? We're all going to be talking about the microtransactions because what you've basically done is you put in the world's most expensive difficulty slider. So my advice to you is, though the game is definitely fun, it's certainly enjoyable. If you are 100% dead set against microtransactions being in your game, just be aware they're absolutely in this game. Do they affect the person as they play it? No, they didn't affect me at all, but that doesn't mean that won't change. It is incredibly enjoyable, and if you're just new to it and you can stick through that story, there is an insanely deep combo system here. So anyway, that's it for me. I hope you guys liked the video. If you did, give it a thumbs up. If you didn't, give it a thumbs down. Maybe check out Reddit or Twitter. Follow me there. All of the links are in the description. You can also follow me on Facebook, or you can become a patron on the Patreon website, which helps me give you guys reviews that aren't 2 minutes long or filled with sponsored bullcrap. And as always, I buy a copy of every single game I review. Oh, lastly, you can follow me Twitch, ACG on Twitch. So anyway, that's it for me. Peace out and enjoy the rest of your week.